In the gospel we just heard today, Jesus presents another astonishing challenge to you and to me. This part of the Sermon on the Plain is the continuation of a vigorous training session for those who are going to follow Jesus, preach his message, and probably be rejected because of it. So Jesus advised them, to the person who strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. Offer the other one to your enemy. Love your enemies. Do good to them, and expect nothing in return. This gospel is surely a counterpoint to the first reading that we heard this morning. We read that it was permissible and actually encoded in the law to exact an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. There's much more to the story, but the laws of retaliation in the Old Testament establish the right to seek damages similar to the same crime perpetrated, even taking a life for a life. Jesus reversed that law. One of the hardest things to do in life, I know it is for me, is to turn the other cheek when someone bullies or murders a person, especially because that person is of a different ethnic group, gender, race, or caste. How do Jews forgive Hitler for executing their family members? How do parents forgive those who shot their children in school? How do persons of color forgive those who enslaved and lynched their ancestors? Love your enemies, says Jesus. As we know, this is Black History Month. It was inaugurated in the 1920s to remember the emancipation of slaves and to celebrate the contributions that Black people make to this country. And as you know, there is a lot of discussion and disagreement about how much of the history of Black people should be taught in our schools and universities. American history has many chapters, and those chapters reveal our country's good and bad sides. But we cannot overlook the whole of American history. The Bible has many episodes that graphically record acts of good and evil. But that does not stop you and me from reading the whole story, as we did this morning, about a vengeful God. Before the pandemic took hold of our country, I had the opportunity to visit civil rights museums and memorials in Alabama. As I stood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, I grieved as the images of Bloody Sunday flashed in my mind. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s awakened our nation to the reality of racial injustice and hatred that continue to affect Americans who are of different colors, and all of us, eventually, in one way or another. I thought as I was standing on that bridge, not only of the marchers who were severely trampled and beaten on that bridge, but I also thought of those people who attacked them. Who were they? What were they thinking? What drove them to do such harm to peaceful protesters or to other human beings also created by God? Would they be forgiven? The gospel today says, forgive and you will be forgiven. Easier said than done. What was Jesus proposing to us in today's message? New Testament scholar Sarah Hendrich explained, all that power that flows from Jesus will bring about a very different world, God's world. The power will level the playing field no matter what rules we have established to create and protect our own positions. The thriving of all creatures in God's realm, God's kingdom, requires a different ethos from those customarily in place. How do we get over this? How do we get over what's happening to us in this country today, where we're suspicious of even our friends, where there's a kind of a challenge at every junction? How did we become so litigious, suing everybody just because they don't agree with me? The late John Lewis, civil rights activist and respected member of Congress, was the epitome of this gospel text. Although almost bludgeoned to death at different times in his life, he, like other nonviolent civil rights activists, whether at a lunch counter or on that bridge in Selma, never once fought back. Lewis urged, and I quote, "Speak up, speak out, get in the way, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America." Oh, Jesus got in good trouble, of course. Jesus got into plenty of good trouble to save people, to pave a path for you and for me to freedom from all injustices. He cared for those who were sick and oppressed. But Jesus also welcomed sinners, remember? In today's Psalm 103, God pardons all your iniquities. God heals all of your sins. Privatized prisons are still filled because we have an eye for an eye mentality in this country about how to deal with criminals. Slavery continues to exist around the world in various forms: child labor, sex trafficking, unfair wages, the rise of authoritarian dictators. Social inequities, anger, and hate continue to tear this country apart. We can counter these overwhelming atrocities by stressing human goodness, finding something good in each one of us, just finding something good, even in our enemies. John Lewis advised, "I alone cannot change the world," he said, "but I can cast a stone across the water to create many, many ripples." God needs you and me to make ripples. God needs you and me to get into trouble, good trouble, during this chapter of cosmic history. The biblical playbook that I spoke about last week tells us to be resilient, to work harder together as teammates, so that we can act justly, walk humbly, and speak kindly. In January 1972, Pope Paul VI called justice, and I quote, "a collective and universal phenomenon." He then quoted the prophet Isaiah, chapter 32. "If you want peace, work for justice." We might add today, and if we want justice, work for reconciliation.